Coming up, I'm sometimes asked, why don't you Rejoiners just get over it and shut up about Brexit? People have had enough of it now. And that is absolutely correct. People have had enough of Brexit now, with new research just published by think tank the UK and a Changing Europe showing fewer than 1 in 10 British voters saying Brexit has been a success, and fewer than 1 in 3 believing it will ever prove to have been the right decision. Stay tuned. I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, subscribe, and above all, share a link to this video with your social media contacts. The reason I still often talk about Brexit in my videos, 3.5 years after the UK left the European Union and over 7 years since the advisory referendum, is because Brexit is even now still unfolding. It hasn't gone away. Passionate voices on both sides are still angry with Brexit itself or in the manner in which it has been implemented. Brexit continues to generate headlines, and public opinion is still changing. Poll trackers confirm the massive shift in attitudes since the referendum. This partly reflects the fact that 16% of Brexit voters say they would have voted Remain in hindsight, according to this latest research. But what is probably even more significant is that as the older demographic who disproportionately supported Brexit shuffle off this mortal coil, they're being replaced in the electorate by voters who have reached 18 years of age since the referendum and who would have voted Remain by a ratio of 85 to 15 had they been old enough to vote. But even without that demographic factor, this research has established that if those who actually did vote in the referendum knew then what they know today, the vote to Remain versus Leave would have been split 60-40 in favour of remaining. And of course that gap would be even wider given the demographic changes since the referendum. The claim is that both sides told lies. But I think this finding absolutely highlights that it was the Leave campaign that told the most lies. That's not an opinion, that's counting. But I also offer this old Leave.eu advert as evidence, just to back up the cold hard figures.
You will benefit from better care provided by our NHS thanks to the reallocation of funds from the EU budget. Controlled immigration will lead to reduced waiting times for you and your loved ones. Excess funding that would otherwise be sent to Brussels could also be directed to education, meaning better prospects for your children. Your wages will rise thanks to better controlled immigration, which will lead to less competition for jobs. Your weekly food shop will become cheaper. Food prices will no longer be inflated by agricultural policies controlled by the EU. You and your family will benefit from a resurgent economy led by new and flourishing small businesses following the removal of burdensome EU regulations and red tape. With less pressure on housing, younger generations will also find it easier to get on the housing ladder. Politicians, both local and national, will become more accountable, helping to strengthen your community and others, especially those most damaged by EU policies like farming, fishing, and industries like steel. A more prosperous and safer future awaits us outside the EU. A vote to leave is a vote for a brighter future for you, your family, and your community.
This research paper by the UK and a Changing Europe also finds that a large majority of Leave voters, 70%, think leaving the EU could have benefited the UK economy, but these opportunities have not been grasped. To my mind, that's 70% of Leave voters who still can't admit that they made the wrong decision, finding it easier to lay the blame somewhere else. But as I say, that's just my opinion. We all love to think that we're rational beings, making up our minds based on the evidence available to us. But the truth is, it's the other way around. People make up their minds and then, through a process of confirmation bias, shape the evidence to fit the narrative that they already decided on. I'm just surprised there isn't a higher proportion than 70% of Leave voters who are still in denial about the intrinsic stupidity of any kind of Brexit. The research also highlighted that immigration played an important role in convincing people to vote Leave. Yet Leave voters are now divided on whether Brexit will ultimately enable the UK to reduce net migration. The truth is, Brexit has caused a very large spike in the number of legal migrants coming to the UK. Not my words, but those of Immigration Minister Honest Bob Jenrick, speaking at a fringe event at the Conservative Party conference. He added that the government must do more to reduce the number of people coming to the UK legally after net migration hit a record 606,000 last year. And despite Jenrick's reputation for doing dodgy deals with fellow ministers over unfair allocations of grants from the Towns Fund, and equally dodgy deals with property developer cronies handing them millions in profits at the expense of the local authority, Honest Bob actually lived up to his name for once when he said this about immigration. After leaving the European Union, we ended up creating a system that was, if anything, more liberal than the one we had beforehand. If they were equally honest, I believe both Leave and Remain voters would admit to have never having heard of the Dublin Agreement allowing the UK to return would-be asylum seekers to the first member country of entry until after the referendum. File that alongside the Irish border issue, labour shortages across entire industrial sectors, and a 90-day limit to stays within the EU as all being stuff that the average voter knew sod all about when asked to express their opinion in that fateful advisory referendum. Some other really interesting findings in the research included the fact that respondents who voted Leave expressed a real sense of fatigue with the Brexit debate, and that meant that they had what the report calls relatively high levels of indifference with regards to the future of the UK's relationship with the EU. That to me suggests that despite Labour and Lib Dem nervousness about campaigning on reversing the Tories' Brexit, actually most of the electorate are fairly relaxed about moving back towards Europe. Indeed, 46% of respondents in the researchers' focus groups support a third referendum on EU membership, with only 32% opposed. The study also found that there is clear support, 53% net, for a closer relationship with the EU, including among Leave voters. Even more interestingly, and something that even I found surprising, was this statement in the report. We find high levels of distrust towards politicians and a sense that Brexit was used instrumentally by the Conservative Party rather than being a response to the public's genuine concerns about Europe. I think this is why the game is up for the Tories after 13 years in power. Their majority was handed to them at the 2019 election by non-Tories lending the party their votes in Brexit-leaning seats. Now, those vote lenders, even those inexplicably still in favour of Brexit, are saying, actually, you Tories have used us and not delivered what you promised either on Brexit or on the economy. This means that the Tories cannot fight the next election over Brexit again, and Keir Starmer's Labour Party seems equally willing to swerve it as a battleground for the next election. I'm coming round to the view that this might be a good call by Labour. Since the Brexit referendum, the Tories have become increasingly radicalised in the Brexit doctrine. A doctrine that promised the resurgence of a global Britain, a populist Make Britain Great Again dogma, to coin a phrase, that was only achievable through a drastic and absolute separation from the EU and its institutions. It was complete bollocks. But still, the error has been too monumental for Sunak or a single politician in the parliamentary Tory party to admit. These Brexit ultras have gone from lying and making unrealistic promises to now trying to deflect blame for the failure of Brexit and hunting for scapegoats. Immigrants, the EU itself, those bloody Remainers, the blob, the civil service, the BBC, lefty lawyers and the Guardian reading tofu-eating wokerati. And again, borrowing the language of Trump in describing yet another scapegoat as being Brexitists in name only. Binos, I guess, an insult often hurled at the current cult leader, Rishi Brexiteer Sunak himself. They went from denying that there were any downsides to Brexit to instead laying blame everywhere else for its failure. No wonder not just me, but the press, the broadcast media and most British voters are still talking about Brexit more than 7 years after that fateful decision was made.
Welcome to the Brexit, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.